So guys, this is a technique. I'm going to show you two things right now. One is how to wedge your clay, and the other is how to use the pinch forming method to form your clay. Okay, so I'm going to start with a hunk of clay. This is a much bigger hunk of clay that I'm going to use. But to wedge the clay, I prefer to start with a bigger hunk and wedge this to get it ready to use. What I'm doing is I'm pushing and smearing the clay, and once I go about 4 or 5 wedges, I'm going to change directions. So as I wedge, it's starting to spread out this way, and I'm going to turn it on its end and go the other direction. You can see the table is getting really wet as I wedge. You should know that these wooden tables are absorbent and they're sucking the water out of the clay. So the longer you wedge, the drier your clay is going to get. Also, the longer you wedge, the wetter your table is going to get. You see, I keep wedging in the same spot. If you notice your clay is starting to stick to the table, go ahead and move to a different spot, and it won't stick as much anymore. Okay? So we're push and smear, push and smear, push and smear, push and smear. Every time I push and roll it back, I'm rolling it back and pushing again. Roll it back, push again. This is called the ram's head technique, and you can tell because it makes a little ram's head. See, you got the horns here, there's my eyes, and he's sticking his tongue out at you. This is what it should look like if you're doing this right. And what's happening is the air is being forced out. Little bubbles of air are being forced out in this fold right here. You do not want air in your clay, because when we fire these objects, that air will expand, cause your piece to crack, or worse yet, explode. You do not want your piece to explode in the kiln. It's not a good way to make friends in this class, because when your piece explodes, it's going to damage everything around it in the kiln. We don't want that. Okay, so this clay was a little on the wet side, as you can see. A lot of water came out on the table, but not so much it was sticking. But I'm ready to work with this now. So I am balling up my clay now, and the next critical thing to understand is how big of a ball the clay should use. And you can use your hands to figure out. If you've got big hands, you can use a bigger ball of clay. If you've got smaller hands, you're going to use a smaller ball of clay. Here's how to find out. Take your hands, you're going to wrap your hands around, you're going to make sure the heels of your hands can touch, and you want your fingertips to touch. Okay? Heels touching, wrap my fingers around. My fingertips are easily touching, okay? Everything's touching. The heels of my hand, the fingertips, okay? This is the right size ball of clay for my hands right now. I can go smaller, but I don't want to go bigger, okay? All right, so I got it nice and round, and now I'm going to open it up and then begin pinching. And I want you to think about this ball of clay as a sphere, and to think of the sphere as the planet Earth, okay? And so at the planet Earth we have the North Pole and the South Pole, and then we have the equator in the middle, right? All right, so I'm going to hold the ball of clay by holding the southern hemisphere, okay? The South Pole is in the middle of my palm, and it's really important you work in your hands. Do not work on the table. Don't put the clay down on the table to do this work. Hold it in my hands. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to pinch with my right hand, and I'm going to hold with my left hand. So my thumb is going to go in, and this is going to open. Now push the thumb all the way down to about, about 3/4 of an inch from the heel of my hand. So I don't want to go through, but I'm definitely opening the ball of clay here. And from here, I'm going to begin pinching. And I start at the South Pole. I pinch and turn, and pinch and turn, and pinch and turn, and pinch and turn. You can see my little fingerprints happening every time I pinch, right? And as I turn, I'm going to continue spiraling north towards the equator, away from the South Pole. So you're making a great big spiral as you pinch, turn, pinch, turn, pinch, turn, pinch, turn, pinch, turn. And I'm gradually moving north through my lines of latitude until I get to the equator. At the equator, I'm still pinching directly. I'm pinching my fingers together, straight. My thumb pinches my other two fingers. But once I move north of the equator, I'm going to pinch slightly differently. I'm going to start pulling the clay north like this. So I pinch and pull, and I'm pulling the clay. So pinch and pull, pinch and pull, pinch and pull, pinch and pull, pinch and pull. I'm pulling the clay towards the North Pole as I go because I want to create a volume. I want an open form that's hollow inside, and I want to stretch these walls out as far as I can go. So pinch and turn, pinch and turn, pinch and turn, pinch and turn, pulling the clay towards the North Pole, trying to keep my opening small, okay? As small as I can, but I still need to be able to get my thumb in there. And my thumb is fat right here, so it can only go so far. So this is kind of step one. I've roughly formed the ball of clay, and I haven't really changed the shape. It's still a ball. So we'll get to a more interesting shape in a second, but step one is opening the form, creating even thickness through the walls, and if we cut and check it right now, I should see that. And so this is about what you want to see. You see, the walls are about the same thickness. The form is round, and I'm starting to stretch the walls out. Okay? I'm at that same stage. I just did step one. I opened the ball of clay, and I pinched it out to even thickness and still maintain that round shape, trying to keep the hole as small as possible, okay? Keep the opening as small as possible. At this stage, I'm going to go in and try to expand the form, and that's where I'm going to use two fingers on my right hand, and I'm going to start at the South Pole and gently wipe and turn, wipe and turn. I'm smearing and stretching the wall of clay as I turn. And what I'm trying to do is expand and stretch the walls. And I'm really going to stretch the clay as far as I can. And you can see it starting to crack. I kind of want to see that because that's telling me I'm pushing the clay as far as it can go. But if I have any cracks appear, I'm going to simply compress them back together. So let me find some cracks here. It's got some cracks right here. I've got two fingers on the inside of the wall right here. See, this hand, my two fingers are right here on the inside of the wall. So I'm going to smear and compress the clay on the inside of that wall. And now I'm starting to, oops, I got a little hole that just opened up there. So I'm going to try to close that up. I'm actually going to take a little piece of clay and pinch that on there and patch that up. But again, compress, compress, compress. Smush and smear the seam. Okay, it dries out really quickly once you thin it out, and it's important to stop and let it rest so that it stiffens up. If it's going to dry, you want it to stiffen up so it doesn't flex so much. But right now you can see how the clay is flexing. The more it flexes as I handle it, the more these cracks will happen. When they happen, I'm just going to open it up a little more, bring them back together, overlap, and then I'm going to pinch and smear the clay back together. And see this seam here, I can still see it. I want to compress until the seam is gone. And I want to also do that on the inside, although it's really hard to see with the camera. I'm using my finger to compress the seam on the inside. You compress the clay back together while it's wet like this. You see that there? That seam on the inside also needs to be compressed. So watch as I compress that. If your clay is getting a little too dry, just get a little water on your finger and add it to your surface. Just a little. You don't want your clay to get wet and slippery, but just enough to softly moisten the surface. Okay, so this has been stretched out. Step one was open the clay, pinch it out all the way around, get an even thickness. Step two is go in and stretch the walls, expand the walls as far as you can. Try not to open the opening. Try to keep this as small as possible. And you can kind of collar it in if you kind of grab it and squeeze a little bit. But try not to set the clay on the table, because every time you do, you're going to flatten the bottom.